life, I was brought up in probably what would be described as a nominal Christian home, although a nominal Catholic home, although my mother was more devout in terms of her faith. My father was probably more on the nominal side, so that when at university, when I decided and understood the salvation aspect of who Jesus was and what he did on the cross for me, my father's response was, well, Pete, I'm really, really happy for you, but don't let them get your money. And that, out of all the responses that I got when I first became a Christian, was the one that shocked me and made me really sit up, because it was the first time that I was really challenged that I needed to connect my faith with my wallet. And at that time, it was the late 80s, and you remember at that time that there were people like the televangelists and all of those horrendous, ugly things that were happening in the 80s with money in the church. I think that there was theme parks that have now been closed down, and all of those really terrible things. And my dad's comments at that time made me very defensive, and also made me struggle a little bit as to how does this actually go. So whilst Christian life has been up and down, and you have some really joyous moments, and then you have some real trials, and you learn through all of those for your benefit. In 2007 I started here at Christian Super. Now I think it's really humorous, because my dad's comment of don't let them get your money, I'm now working with an organisation, Christian Super. I'm the CEO here, where we have just a little over $600 million of 20,000 pastors and church workers' money. So Dad, I now have their money. My role at Christian Super is I'm the CEO here, and our vision statement is to see people live life with financial health and understanding. We want people to have a real, proper Christian perspective of money. When we were framing that vision statement, one of the things that we wanted to talk about was people not having any regrets. It was that we didn't want them to have regrets that they hadn't saved up enough for their retirement season of their life. But on the flip side, what we didn't want them to do was for them to have too much money so that they have regrets in their working life. So as a superannuation fund, we're probably a little bit different in we want to work out how much money should you have in retirement, rather than just accumulate as much money in your superannuation balance and actually hope that that's the best. So it's actually seeing people live life, all of life, with financial health. We don't want them to be out on the street, but also understanding, in terms of understanding that they have a true Christian perspective on money. And by that, what we're trying to say, and Mark Green has written in a book recently, that your Christian experience is, your life is a peach, not an orange. In that it's a whole, is that as an orange, sometimes you segment things in your life, and probably in terms of your view of money as Christians, I think that a lot of us have a very, 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 very slither of a piece of orange, whereas his view is that your life is a peach. It's holistic, that you've got to look at it in a complete way. So in terms of what we're trying to do at Christian Super, in terms of managing people's money and promoting financial stewardship, is actually getting people back to the core views of what does it mean to manage money from a Christian perspective. And as you know, Edwin is a church historian, and we're a bit of a nerdy family. So one of the things that I did was go back and have a look at what were some historical views of money over the past 2,000 years within the church. And it basically comes down to three kinds of doctrines. The first kind of doctrine that came out of the early church was a poverty mentality, is that money is bad and evil, godly people are poor, and that money is really bad. That came out of the sort of monastic movement, and that was sort of the prevailing culture for really up until the Reformation. What we've seen in recent years has been a prosperity doctrine, which is, I suppose, another doctrine that you've seen in the church, which is God wants me to be rich, godly people are rich, and it's all about God's blessing on your life and how you are rich. That probably also doesn't sit particularly well with me and what we're trying to do at Christian Super. The area that we feel most comfortable is the one that probably emerged within the Reformation, and that is that we're called to be good stewards of the money, and good stewards of the resources and whatever God has given us. And that a key principle of that is, whose money is it really? It's not mine, it's God's. I'm just called for the period that I have on this life. I think one of the Psalms says, 70, or if you've got the strength, 80, for the period that I have on this life, on this world, to actually steward that money in a way that God thinks that we should do that. In terms of how we manage our money at Christian Super, we invest it in accordance with biblical principles. So that means that we explore a whole range of ethical issues, and it's really good. As a fund, we've been the first two-time winner of Ethical Investors Sustainable Super Fund of the Year. That's really good for the fund, for us to be doing it in accordance with biblical values. But what does that mean in terms of, what does stewardship mean in terms of day-to-day life and a fair income Aussie's view of it? Okay. So what does this mean from a day-to-day basis? Well, one of the things that, one of the great joys of being at Christian Super is that we were able to work with Focus in the Family and develop a Bible study series on stewardship and on giving money. And if Grae or anyone wants some of them, we're happy to give that to anyone in the church who wants it. And when we worked through that with the guys from Focus on the Family, we actually came down to, what's a quick litmus test? What's a litmus test to see if people are looking at their money from a biblical point of view? We actually came up with the view, it's actually your preparedness to give. Your preparedness to recognise that this is not your money, and your preparedness to be generous to others. And I think that's probably the wonderful litmus test as to whether you firstly know whose money it is, secondly know how much money there is in your bank account, and thirdly your willingness to give that money away. It's a wonderful litmus test. So I suppose at Christian Super, and 25 years of thinking through what my dad said to me when I first became a Christian, has made me think through that. Firstly, my dad, unfortunately, as much as I love him, was wrong on a couple of counts. One, it was never my money to begin with. It's God's money. And two, whilst I need to be careful that they don't get my money, I need to make sure that I appropriate the money that God has given to me at this time of my life in accordance with His rules. And that requires a lot more effort than just trusting someone. It actually requires me sitting down and understanding a biblical view of money, where I should be spending money, where I should be saving, where I should be generous, and sitting down and making sure that we are intentional in that as part of our witness to God.